Roda and his colleagues used to tell us back then that the pen is mightier than the sword. And these days the cell phone is mightier than your cell phone is mightier than the what? Is mightier than a drone. I want to give a background, just an overview of what we are seeing in the world today. And in my short presentation, I'm going to look at what's happening in Hong Kong, deliberately so, because I want to speak in light of the United States Chief Security Advisor, who said blatantly and loudly and clearly in front of camera that the problems they were facing during the Black Lives Matter protests were the work of the United States adversaries. And in the list of the adversaries, he did make it categorically clear that this small country, the land that is located between the Zambezi and the Limpopo, is one of the adversaries of the United States. So it is in the light of that where I want to unpack or to unravel or to bring into light or to bring to remembrance some of the issues that have been going on that have led to the current discourse, which I think my colleagues are going to speak about. After the destabilization, after the coup d'etat of Brazil in 1964 and the Chilean coup against the Chilean president Salvador Allende, who was were backed by CIA that was 1964 and 1973. In 1983, the United States changed its approach from that of overt destabilization and overt coup d'etats in countries, in strategic countries. They changed their approach to a new approach where they formed an organization called the National Endowment for Democracy, NED. That organization has been bankrolling, working with another organization called the International Republican Institute and the National Democracy Institute and others. They work with, they are no longer using force, as it were. They create internal revolts within countries in order to then justify, when necessary, foreign interventions. I'm sure we're all old enough to have experienced or witnessed the Arab Spring, the events in the Arab Spring that led to the disposal of Mubarak in Egypt, Bouteflika, and more importantly, Muammar Gaddafi, and what is currently happening in Hong Kong. So when we are talking about the challenges or the internal issues within Zimbabwe, also taking into consideration the planned protest of July 31, we must understand these dynamics within the context of the United States intervention or interference in other countries that they view as, number one, as strategic, number two, as renegade. Because the United States is following a policy, an imperialistic foreign policy enunciated by Henry Kissinger of destabilizing in other countries and colonizing, neo-colonialism as it were, colonizing those countries in order to take control of or to loot their resources. They have tried in Zimbabwe. They tried through the Economic Structural Adjustment Program. For those of you who were young, ESAP was one of the prescriptions that was prescribed by the Bretton Woods institutions on Zimbabwe, seen as it were as a program that was going to bolster foreign direct investment, that was going to create a conducive environment for business. But those of you who research, you realize that economic structural adjustment programs, as Zimcode wrote sufficiently, and they argued that these structural adjustment programs do not work, but what they do is that they open up countries for manipulation and control and looting by the foreign countries. One of the objectives of ASAP was that it was going to open opportunities and doors for FDIs to come into Zimbabwe. But when they come in, they have conditions, and those conditions would make them be able to loot our natural resources literally for free in order to develop their own countries. So after ASAP failed, of course, if you understand, if you read Zidera, you also realize that one of the reasons why Zimbabwe was put under sanctions is because of one, the land reform, because we took away land from the white farmers. Number two, because of our intervention in the DRC. If you read Zidera 2001, it's clear one of the conditions for Zimbabwe to be removed under sanctions, or for those sanctions or the so-called restrictive measures to be reviewed, was the withdrawal of Zimbabwean troops from the DRC. Why DRC? Because Zimbabwe went in to thwart an American project, because the United States was funding Rwanda and Ugandan rebels who were trying to dethrone to overthrow Laurent Kabila's government, in order to allow the United States to impose their own puppet governments, who will in turn allow them to loot not as much natural resources as possible. Fast forward, the classic, there is also the argument about human rights violations in Zimbabwe, and I want to put it to the public domain that human rights is an issue, but it's not an issue. If the United States was so particular about human rights, they should have led by example. Why did we have the Black Lives Matter protests in the United States? Because they have over 2 million black Americans who are in prison for flimsy reasons, and they are blacks. And if the United States of America cared so much about human rights, people are being slaughtered like goats day in and day out in Saudi Arabia. The United States is saying nothing about that. If the human rights violations were the big issue, why did the United States keep quiet between 1983 and 1987 when our own government was butchering our very own people in Matabeleland? So we then realize that they now want to use the human rights card simply because Robert Mugabe turned against them and started taking away farms from the white farmers. And if it's about human rights violations, people are being abducted daily in Rwanda. Opposition, every voice, Paul Kagame is silencing voices of dissent in Rwanda, and the United States is not saying a word about it. So, I am not condoning human rights violations. Human rights violations are wrong, and we condemn them with the strongest terms. Abductions, genuine abductions that I witnessed myself in 1983 to 1987 in Matabeleland, where our relatives were abducted and we never saw them up to this day. I am not talking about these abductions where somebody tweets and says and live streams himself and saying, I am being abducted. I'm talking about abductions where people went for good and up to today they have never been seen. So, I want to dispel the issue that Zimbabwe is being punished because of its human rights record. The United States is #1 violator of human rights. Why can't it lead by example? Why can't they lead by example? Then I want to bring into light what's been happening in Zimbabwe since 1999. In 2001, organizations were formed, and the United States deliberately said they are channeling resources through NGOs. And which NGOs have been funded? Yes, they have PEPFAR, we appreciate, but PEPFAR gives not more than $25,000 United States dollars anyway for programs. Majority of the money is going into Keshivism. And they are doing it in Hong Kong, They did it in Sudan, they did it in Libya, they did it in Egypt, and they want to do it too in Zimbabwe, if ever there is a word like that. They want to do it in Zimbabwe because, as I conclude, if you did not know, I'm telling you a personal testimony. When I was in the United States, in a flight from Atlanta, Georgia to Raleigh-Durham, North Carolina, I sat with a German guy who told me to come back to Zimbabwe because this country is a marvel. They leave Europe coming to Zimbabwe, coming to Africa looking for greener pastures. Unfortunately, we Zimbabweans are naive. We have been blinded. We have been brainwashed through colonial education to think that washing toilets in England and taking care of old people in old people's homes in England. I'm not condemning people that are doing that, but I'm saying we've been taught that going out there to do menial jobs in England is the in thing. But they leave England coming to Zimbabwe looking for greener pastures. Chinese leave Guangzhou and Beijing and all those provinces coming to Zimbabwe and establish factories. But Zimbabweans are busy denigrating their own country on social media. What kind of a people are we? That German guy told me that Zimbabwe, he's a consultant, a geologist. He told me that Zimbabwe is seated on not less than 13 million, not kilograms, 13 million tons of gold alone. And if you calculate that value of underground gold that we have comes up to something like 333 trillion United States dollars. That's 30 times the GDP of the US. Lithium is the in thing today, and we have the largest deposits of lithium. So Donald Trump was right when he said, and I quote, Zimbabwe is a unique and extraordinary threat to the United States foreign policy, and I close quote. As a result, the United States is so interested in this country. Why do you think that they built the largest embassy in Africa, in a country that is viewed as an adversary? Don't you find it weird, members of the fourth estate, that America has built the largest embassy in a country that is viewed as an adversary? What is the United States' interest? The United States, as I'm sure the colleagues will go into the details about that, the United States is angry at the ZANU-PF government because in 1999, the ZANU-PF government turned tables. Otherwise, it's not about human rights. Otherwise, it's not about, I've already said, if they cared about human rights, they should, CIA should have not been complicit in their involvement in the Kukurahundi atrocities. So, I want to take it that the colleagues would then unpack the current dynamics. What is happening? Who is behind July 31? Is July 31 going to solve our problems? I want to take it to that these governments that are viewed as renegade to the United States foreign policy are then made to fail by the United States, so that the citizens of those countries will revolt against those governments and overthrow them, and CIA will fold hands and pretend that they were not involved. I rest my case.